Welcome back, guys, to the Cloudiator podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the AWS Well Architected Framework. I am RJ Jeffrey, sporting my new COVID do. If you don't know me, I eat, sleep, breathe all things AWS. I am an 8-time AWS certified cloud engineer working with the platform for about 13 years now, and an application developer at heart. Joining me is Zubin Ghaffari.
Hey RJ, a little bit about me. I am 9 times AWS certified. I also hold a Terraform HashiCorp certification. My passion is the cloud, and I'm all in with AWS, but I've done GCP and Azure in the past. They all have their strengths.
Very cool. All right. I'm really excited about this one, Zubin. Let's talk about the AWS Well Architected Framework. So, in summary, it's a framework that embodies the principles of optimized cloud environments. Really, that's what it comes down to. But its purpose is to help businesses and their cloud architects build secure, reliable, well-performing, and cost-optimized environments. So if you think about why companies go to the cloud, we can understand why there's such a need for this type of framework. Companies go to the cloud because they want speed to market, they want the ability to innovate, they want to be able to pay as they go and without spending all this money up front and investing in servers and waiting to procure those servers. Sometimes they're also just trying to gain access to certain services that they wouldn't be able to, wouldn't be feasible for them to have on premises. They also might want to scale in real time as needed. It's really an engine for business innovation, but all of that can be a show of its own, right, Zubin?
Yeah, and that can definitely be a show of its own. Initially, when you're first going to the cloud, many organizations look at it as simply an extension of their data center. And early on, that's okay, but there's so much more to it. And if you don't look at the bigger picture, you can run very inefficiently and get yourself in a lot of trouble. The cloud provides you major benefits from cost reduction, data security, scalability, and disaster recovery. You can start off rehosting to the cloud and leveraging some of your on-premise resources, but your end goal should always be to become fully cloud native and leverage cloud native resources. An example of this could be if you're leveraging SafeNet on-premise, you can use KMS in the cloud. An analogy I like to use is software systems are a lot like building a bridge. If it's not structurally sound, then it's going to fall apart. This is why AWS came out with the Well Architected Framework. It provides you the 5 pillars that you need to use to bring about stability, make your system secure and efficient in the cloud.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was really born out of the need for best practices, right? So AWS, as you might know, has tons of services and many ways to do the same thing or something very similar. How do you know what's the best way for you to implement it? So research has shown that the vast majority of cloud environments actually have pretty significant deficiencies. You want to optimize as much as it's feasible for you, and you want to minimize any potential risk. And not only technical risks, but also it's important to get the most ROI out of your cloud investment. After all, this might be a big step for you and your organization. So if you're going to go to the cloud, it's really worth spending the time to get the most ROI out of that investment. All right, so let's talk about some cloud anti-patterns we typically see and how well architected really helps these specific cases. So a lot of times you'll see that, as we already mentioned, a lot of companies treat the cloud as an extension of their data center. And again, initially it might make sense, but ideally you want to be starting to think about all the different ways that the cloud can really elevate your operations, your applications, and most importantly, your people and your customer experience. It's a whole new approach to how you treat your environment. And again, we'll have another show on this, but I think it's really worth reiterating all of that.
One of the cardinal concepts in DevOps is immutable infrastructure, basically the notion of pets versus cattle. We have transitioned from pets, which is a traditional way of viewing our infrastructure, to what is now the cloud age, where we treat our resources like cattle. Pets are giving loving names like Spiker Henry, and these are things like mainframes, load balancers, and firewalls.
Do you name your pet Henry? What
I've
about
named my fish
George?
Henry. George works as well.
Okay. All right. Just making sure.
Yeah. uh, so when you treat um, so when it comes to the cattle, you give them identification numbers, right? This could be like server one or server two. This is similar to the way cattle are giving numbers tagged to their ears. One can get sick, you replace it with another. So in technology, you're creating more servers to replace the bad ones. So if you can't send traffic to it, it's failing health checks. It'll destroy itself and recreate itself. And this is all transparent to the user, right? So as I've said, these include things like servers, clusters, and data stores.
That's right. Yeah. And you also have a lot of access to possibilities through automation with the cloud as well. And that's not just the AWS console, right? You have access to the actual AWS API. So the console, as you might or might not know, that's the website that you're logging into when you go into AWS. Really, that's just the front end to the actual AWS API. So the AWS API is what really is running everything behind the scenes. So you have access to that API. You have access to that API. You have access to the SDK, so you can build your applications to be aware of your infrastructure. Your application, if you wanted to, you can have it spin up additional resources at it as it needs using the SDK. As just one example. You also have access to the CLI as well, right? The command line interface. You can do all your scripting. You can create Bash scripts, PowerShell scripts, whatever you need to basically build out, whatever automation that you want. And these typically weren't available to a on-premises environment. This is really something that the cloud made more possible. All right. So let's talk about what the Well Architected Framework covers. So overall, it currently has about 46 different points across 5 different pillars. Those pillars include cost optimization, security, performance, reliability, and operational excellence. How about you and I, Zubin, go through and explain kind of a little more about what each of these are? And I can start. So cost optimization is, are you really getting the most from your cloud? Are you shutting down environments when you're not using them? Think about your non-prod environments, right? Do they need to be running 24/7? Probably not. Sometimes there's an exception for if you have offshore teams working, but typically you can probably spin down some of those environments and recoup some of that cost. Also, evaluating new AWS services, right? So a lot of times, a lot of companies might spend a lot of time and effort building out specific solutions. Those solutions, a lot of times, believe it or not, AWS will create solutions for you that are as managed services. So you want to make sure that you have some sort of schedule in place or some sort of routine that you go through and you're evaluating those AWS services that might be pertinent to you.
Yeah, I'll take security. So, are you secure and do you know what to do in the case of an incident? How do you defend against emerging security threats? Are you using security control frameworks like NIST, CIS, and ISO? So this pillar is very, very important because it's leveraged to protect information, your system, and assets through things like risk assessments and mitigation strategies. These can be achieved through automation, encryption of data at rest and in transit, and traceability, to name a few.
All right. So performance, let's talk about that. Can your application scale? That's what it really comes down to. How did you size your compute or database solutions, right? Are you sizing for peak volume? So you might be used to, if you are from a traditional on-premises infrastructure environment, for sizing for peak volume, right? You want to make sure that you have enough capacity available to meet those media days or those big events that happen. So you want to make sure to peak for that type of peak volume. However, in the cloud, you don't really have to do that, right? Because you can scale elastically. And so you can build out your environments to automatically adjust additional compute resources as you actually need them. Also, how are you prioritizing performance versus your cost optimization? So a lot of times what you'll see is that there's this concept of trade-offs, right? So maybe you can be performant in one area, but more cost optimized in another area. But you have to be able to figure out how to balance that trade-off. And the AWS Well Architected Framework can help you with that.
Yeah, so reliability. Can you withstand failure? This one's pretty simple. What is your disaster recovery process? How are you testing your resiliency? A few principles here: test recovery procedures, automatically recovering from failure, and scaling out horizontally to increase or aggregate system availability, right?
That's right. Yeah. And the final pillar is operational excellence. Are you operating efficiently? What does your deployment process look like? And how are you mitigating against that deployment risk? Right. So are you basically copying files when you deploy? Are you, and it doesn't have to be from an application deployment perspective either. It can also be from a infrastructure deployment perspective. A lot of that, what you would normally do, a lot of the procedures that you would handle when you're in an on-premises environment looks a lot different when you go to the cloud, because you now have access to additional services. In the case of deployment, you have access to various different deployment technologies and deployment pipelines that you can leverage to mitigate a lot of the risks from what you would normally do if you were on premises. Also, how do you know your operations are healthy, right? So your systems, your resources, what are those things that you're doing to make sure that they're healthy? So we've covered, some parts of the different pillars, but really this is a pretty extensive process. We will have a follow-up to discuss some of these more in depth. So while we're talking about this, let's talk about what an actual process looks like when a partner comes on site, or let's just talk about the well-architected process itself. So you can do this yourself. The tools are there. They're now in the AWS console. You can log in if you have an AWS account and go to the well-architected section and do a well-architected assessment yourself. However, the real benefit here is that you want to bring a partner in and have the partner help you go through the well-architected process. And really, the main reason for that is the partner is going to have that outside perspective and experience, having had done this at multiple other clients in the past, to really help guide you in the overall process itself. It takes about 3 to 5 hours, so it's a bit of a time investment for you. But I think really what it comes down to is it becomes a really small investment compared to the benefits that come out of it. Overall, it's a very thorough discussion that looks at just one workload. Is this an e-commerce application? Is this your enterprise ERP? What are we looking at? And can we dive into these pillars on that?
Yeah, it's also really important to bring all the stakeholders together, right? Your network operations, your engineering, your infosec, and even app dev and database administrators. These are the decision makers, the influencers, the implementers, right? They will provide you with the most holistic perspective on your application, so you don't have to go back and forth when you don't have the necessary information you're looking for.
That's a wrap for this edition. If you liked our show, please hit the like button and please consider subscribing.
And if you want to be the first to know when there's new content, please hit that bell icon.
I'm RJ Jafferkhani.
And I'm Zubin.
Thanks for watching.